Colombia's future on a knife edge as voters reject a peace deal to end 50 years of fighting. We ask what happens next. And the defrosting of the Arctic Ocean is allowing arguments over resources to heat up. Is the North Pole about to become a global battleground? I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. After 4 years of negotiations and an agreement signed in front of thousands, only the public seal of approval was needed to end a brutal 50-year conflict and bring Colombia into a new era of peace and political stability. But in the end, they didn't give peace a chance. By a slim margin, the public voted against the deal, and critics say that it was overtly lenient and allowed too much forgiveness for the rebels' crimes. Ty Genwright reports.
With disappointment etched in their faces and tears in their eyes, Colombians who supported the peace deal witnessed their bright new future wiped away by the slimmest of margins. The referendum was expected to be a formality to end one of the world's longest-running wars, but it's not over yet. Before the vote, President Juan Santos warned that rejection would undo years of painstaking negotiations.
Afterwards,
the president said he would not give up on peace. He sent government negotiators to speak to the rebels once again. It is possible, he said, to come out of this stronger. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, better known as FARC, has been fighting the establishment for more than 50 years, trying to bring about a communist revolution. Thousands have been kidnapped by the group, hundreds of thousands killed during their war, and millions of ordinary Colombians displaced from their homes. The deal guaranteed FARC a say in the political system and ensured that those who confessed to their crimes would face some sanctions but would not go to jail. That was unacceptable to most of those who voted. The deal was 4 years in the making. FARC's leaders had expected to make a transition to peaceful politics. They say they won't let their efforts go up in smoke.
The FARC maintains its willingness for peace and reiterates its position to use only words as weapons to work towards the future. To the Colombian people who dream of peace, you can count on us. Peace will win out.
The eyes of the world were on this agreement. Signing their deal, old enemies wore white in a symbol of peace and used a pen made from an old bullet. Colombians were told that their horrible night of violence was over, but not everyone was ready to forgive and forget.
I think we saw it during the signature ceremony. The guerrilla commander was interrupted while giving his speech by a low-flying combat jet. And a lot of people speculate that this may have been a sort of indiscipline act, which also says speaks volumes about the time it will take, because not everybody is on board, clearly not everybody in the armed forces, and most certainly not everybody in the political arena.
And yet the balance was only tipped by a tiny fraction of voters in a plebiscite in which fewer than 40% of those eligible cast their ballots. Bad weather kept many at home. It was a bittersweet victory for campaigners against the deal. There is little doubt that the vast majority of Colombians want peace, but not at any cost. Former President Álvaro Uribe, who opposed the deal, said that peace cannot be secured by sacrificing the values that make it possible. Both sides said repeatedly that the deal they made was the best they could achieve. Renegotiation, they said, would not be possible, and yet now they'll try. FARC still has its weapons, although its leadership says it's committed to peace. What nobody can guarantee is if ordinary fighters will choose another path. Ty Genwright, reporting for Insight.
To discuss that further, I spoke earlier to Arthur Dont, a senior analyst at the think tank IHS, about the peace deal and the inconvenient outcome of the weekend's poll. This democracy is not such a good idea when the wrong result comes out, Arthur?
It's certainly put a spanner in the works of the entire peace process and put the whole process in jeopardy. We're likely to see a rather long-winded process now to try and bring things back on track. But as you say, this is certainly not the result that the government was hoping for.
What do they do now? Because the people have said this peace deal is not good enough.
Well, we're likely to see at least several months of renegotiations now. All parties involved, both the government, the opposition and the FARC, say that they are still keen to come up with a peace agreement, but the opposition at the very least are arguing that it needs to be on different terms. So the government sat down yesterday with members of the opposition. We're likely to see a more formal dialogue process being established. But as I say, this is going to take several months. Getting the mechanics of this process is going to take several weeks at least, and then agreeing on the kind of terms that can be negotiated and identifying where there might be any form of wiggle room in the agreement that has already been signed is going to take quite a long time.
If the initial deal has taken months, if not years, to put together, this doesn't augur well, does it? Because some of those sticking points about, for instance, the sort of justice that former guerrillas would face. On the face of it, it's none. The opposition say it should be something. They should serve some time in jail. That's an intractable problem. That's not going to be agreed overnight.
It's not. It's a clear red line for the FARC, particularly the idea of lengthy prison sentences. The other key issue for the FARC, of course, is the idea of political participation, and this is something that the biggest critic of the peace talks, former President Alvaro Uribe, has said he'd like to block as well, at least for certain members of the FARC. These are red lines that were not negotiable, as you say, during the last 4 years of negotiations. So to think that these could be resolved rapidly within a few months is highly unlikely.
And Colombia is a divided nation, isn't it? Because if we look at the outcome of the poll, even the areas which arguably were the most affected by terrorism, by kidnapping, by death, voted for the deal. And it was the cities where the opposition was strongest and people just didn't bother to go to the polls or voted no.
That's broadly right. When you look at a map of where the conflict over the last 50 years has been most pronounced, it's typically in areas that voted yes, with a few exceptions around Arauca, Norte de Santander, Antioquia, which is former President Uribe's stronghold, of course. But the result was very, very close. I think we're talking about less than 55,000 voters ended up making the difference here. What's very interesting is the very low turnout, less than 40% on an issue which should have been historic and should have attracted more people to the poll booths.
Why do you think there was such a low turnout?
I think, on the one hand, there was quite significant complacency among supporters of the peace deal. The polling prior to the agreement showed support in the region of between kind of 60 and 70% broadly. When I was in Colombia just a few weeks ago, the people I was speaking to were almost taking it as a given that the peace talks would pass. So I imagine a lot of yes supporters didn't turn up to the polling booths. The opposition ran a very strong campaign, a very organised campaign, and did mobilise. They also changed the strategy around the campaign. So where Uribe initially was completely opposed to any form of settlement with the FARC, he changed his campaign to one which said that this current deal was the wrong deal. And that gave people an option, or the idea that they could, if they voted no, there would be space for renegotiation.
The real test will be violence breaking out, or another incident, or a murder, which people who oppose this deal will blame on FARC and try and say, therefore, the peace deal's over, the ceasefire's broken. Do you see that as one of the risks in the months ahead?
It's a major risk. I think at the moment the FARC are more militarily exposed than they ever have been before. The armed forces and the intelligence services have a pretty good idea of where they are. They're semi-concentrated in preparation for moving into the transitory concentration areas that they were meant to move into in the coming weeks. So they're likely to start dispersing probably again within the coming weeks if no major announcements are made, because they'll start fearing for their own physical safety and for the risk of arrest, of course. And as this process goes on, and if there's no clear solution, and if it looks like they're going to start facing lengthy prison sentences, then there's a real risk that they'll take up arms again.
And that doesn't augur very well for anybody, does it? I mean, in terms of the business deals, the international community who might want to do business with Colombia. I mean, with some degree of irony, one of the British newspapers had a holiday feature saying 12 reasons why you must go on holiday to Colombia. Well, no one's going to plan a holiday there just now with this uncertainty, are they?
Well, in fairness to Colombia, it's been a pretty nice holiday destination for a little while. You tend not to be able to go into the areas which are very, very violent, and some of the cities are far safer than others in Latin America. But broadly, you're right. President Santos was hoping for up to 1 or 2% GDP growth as a result of the peace deal. More investment in oil and gas, more investment in mining and infrastructure as a result of areas of the country being far safer than they were when the FARC were armed and active. Obviously, all of that's going to take a little bit longer to develop as investors hold out to see what the security environment will be. Obviously, there's significant extra costs when you've got an active guerrilla in the country. In terms of security, in terms of logistics, and they'll want to see how that plays out.
Arthur Dont, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
This is Inside. Coming up, growing concern for the melting Arctic ice cap.